Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the entire timeline of the Rachel Oates versus Gabbie Hanna drama. I'm talking about the most recent video Rachel posted, addressing her parody book that she wrote inspired by Gabbie Hanna's book, Adultolescent. If you're already caught up to date with the previous drama involving Gabbie and Rachel and just want to hear about the most recent video that Rachel posted, skip to this timestamp on the screen. With that being said, we have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So in 2017, Gabbie Hanna released her debut book. It's a collection of poems and the book is called Adultolescence. When researching for this video, I couldn't find any type of I released a book video uploaded from Gabbie, but I feel like I remember her definitely dedicating an entire video to get people to pre-order the book. In a video still up on her channel titled We Need to Talk,
I have something exciting to show you.
That's what she said. You know what? What was that? Okay, James.
Gabbie does say that pre-orders are doing really well in regards to her book, but this couldn't have been the first time she talked about it, right? But it appears to be the first video currently on her channel talking about the book, leaving me to believe that she has either privated or deleted her initial video announcing the news of the book. In this video, Gabbie also announces that she would be going on a book tour, and that was basically all she has on her channel as of today, leading up to the release of Adultolescence. Fast forward 2 years to 2019, Rachel Oates, a YouTuber known for reviewing books, posted a video, you guessed it, reviewing Gabbie's book. The first video is titled Gabbie Hanna's Poetry is Bad, Part 1. The video, in Rachel's own words, accidentally blew up, receiving over 1 million views, and this video was just the start of the Let's Roast Gabbie Hanna's book train. But let me remind you, Rachel Oates has several videos on her channel reviewing and critiquing books written by other authors and celebrities such as Lana Del Rey, Lily Reinhart, Halsey, and yes, Gabbie Hanna. But before she even begins to talk about the book, Rachel starts the video off by saying that poetry is completely subjective and what one person likes and doesn't like is completely up to them. She also says that the video is just her opinion and her analysis based on what she does and doesn't like in poetry as well. But after this disclaimer, she jumps right into her critique of the book.
Sadly, my first impression of Gabbie's poetry was that it's all quite shallow.
She says that Gabbie's poetry was very what you see is what you get. And throughout the video, Rachel reads a handful of poems from Gabbie's book, bringing up what she thinks could have done better, but why she didn't like certain parts of the poem, and even reads poems from other authors to further prove points that she was making about her poetry. When watching this video, it's clear that Rachel has a true passion and love for poetry. Her words and critiques are so intelligent yet respectful. She truly was talking about the content in the book. This wasn't a hate video on Gabbie Hanna, but of course, many would go on to say that Gabbie took it that way. In February 2020, Rachel Oates made a video where she and her dog wrote a parody of Gabbie's book, Adultolescence. The parody book is titled Dogolescence. It's very cute and seemingly harmless, and as Gabbie says her book was written from the perspective of a child, this parody book is written from the perspective of Rachel's dog, Kyra. In the book, Rachel even puts at the top of each poem which poem from Gabbie's book it's inspired by. Originally, the video was titled My Dog Writes Better Poetry Than Gabbie Hanna, but has since been changed to My Dog Writes Parody Poetry. And we'll come back to this later. Gabbie uploads this video on her channel in 2020, but it is currently not on her channel as of now, but the video is called Time to Talk About My Bad Poetry. I haven't been able to find the full video, but from the re-uploaded clips, it doesn't seem like Gabbie directly addresses Rachel in her review on the book, but she does speak about how her book was misunderstood and cries about how deep her own poetry is.
There might be a silly poem about sleeping and dreaming, but it's really about laying in bed and wishing that you were dead, if you read between the lines.
But it's pretty obvious, using context clues, that Gabbie had seen Rachel's critique of her own book.
But in what world would it make sense for me to click a video that says Gabbie Hanna's poetry is bad, whatever it is?
And in true Gabbie Hanna fashion, she finds any way she can to manipulate her audience and make herself out to be the victim. But keep in mind, she wrote a book and book reviewers reviewed it. Shocking. In this video, Time to Talk About My Bad Poetry, Gabbie explains that she wrote the poems from a childlike perspective, but the poems are on very heavy topics. Gabbie says in this video that writing Adultolescence was one of the first ways that she was able to talk about the hard things that she's been going through in her life. Rachel then uploads a video on her channel responding to the video that Gabbie posted defending her poetry. Rachel acknowledges Gabbie's statements about how writing the book helped her talk about hard topics and times in her life. Rachel responds by saying, "Using poetry to help you heal is an amazing, powerful thing." Rachel then goes on to say that anyone who is brave enough to share their poetry with this world is amazing and that should be celebrated. She says, if poetry is for you and to help you heal, then it doesn't really matter if it's good or not. It's fulfilling its purpose and that's enough. What Rachel says next is such a crucial point I really want you guys to hear. After acknowledging how great of an outlet poetry can be for people to heal, she then says, but the minute you start asking people to buy it, the minute you start charging people for it, it needs to be good. The quality needs to be there. And she's absolutely right. As soon as you put something out into the public, it's up for discussion, especially if it's being sold and a profit is being earned. Another example of this would be if a restaurant releases a new item on their menu. The consumer buys that product and is entitled to say whether they liked it or not. And the same goes for Gabby's book. People paid for it, read it, and the majority of the people who did so hated it. But honestly, guys, even if Gabby released this book into the world for free, it still would be completely acceptable for anybody to do what Rachel has done, read it, and talk about what they liked or didn't like about it. Give their honest thoughts and reviews. When you put something into the world, it's automatically up for discussion. In my opinion, as well as many others on the internet, Rachel has always been very respectful when it comes to her criticism of Gabby's poetry. While the critiques of adultolescence were harsh and Rachel did not like the poems, she was still able to bring up points in a respectful manner. Did Gabby return the same amount of maturity? Of course not. Gabby responded to this by posting a video with a passive-aggressive pity party title accompanied by a thumbnail of her crying, and then proceeds to manipulate the audience into feeling pity for her. Throughout this video, it seems as if Gabby was trying to guilt trip her audience into being on her side and to go defend her poetry against Rachel.
Yes, I've obviously seen the talk around my book. At some point, I feel like people really started hiding behind the term constructive criticism while removing the constructive part and leaving only criticism.
Shortly after this, Gabby releases her second poetry book titled Dandelion. And surprisingly, Gabby sent Rachel a copy saying that she wanted it in the hands of people who actually loved poetry.
Gabby actually reached out to me over Twitter to ask if I wanted a copy of her latest book, Dandelion.
Being someone whose channel consists mainly of book reviews, Rachel of course reviewed Gabby's new book. Rachel starts off the video by commending and thanking Gabby for reaching out and sending her the book. She says that by offering to send her the book, even after she critiqued her first one so harshly, it shows a lot of growth and maturity from Gabby. She also says that she has a lot of respect for Gabby because of this. The first critique Rachel talks about is the book that had 3 different ending versions released, so in order to read all of the endings, you basically had to buy the book 3 times. Or I guess you could stand in the middle of the book aisle at Target and read each book and the pages real quick, but that's none of my business.
And that just feels like a kind of greedy cash grab to get her impressionable young fans, who are mostly children and teenagers, to part with money they don't have, and it just kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit.
Cash grabby, cash Gabby? Okay, sorry, I'll stop. But yeah, in my opinion, the whole 3 different endings thing was just a scheme to get more sales, resulting in more money in Gabby's pockets, just like she did with the limited edition book covers of Adultolescence.
Peach and white are super limited edition. So if you want the super limited edition ones, you gotta go find them. And honestly, I kind of like that. It's like a game. It's like Pokemon.
Throughout the video, Rachel analyzes the poetry written by Gabbie Hanna. She never critiques Gabby as a person.
This isn't a review of Gabby or her character at all. This is a book review.
She talks about the structure of the poetry, what Gabby could have done differently with certain poems, and how the book was overall just not good. But she remains very tasteful and respectful throughout the review, just like she did in her previous reviews of Adultolescence. She then goes on to say that Gabby is a much better story writer than she is a poetry writer. She says it makes sense because Gabby's a storyteller, referring to her story times that she posted on her YouTube channel. Rachel even says that that's why she's watched Gabby and was a fan of Gabby, because of her storytelling skills. Rachel says Gabby lacks the technical skills that come with writing poetry. She says that her first big critique of Dandelion is the same as her issue with Adultolescence. She says the book is mostly just filler. If you don't know what filler is, it's basically quickly and poorly written poems to add pages to her book, and a lot of the filler pages in the book become repetitive, and Rachel claims Gabby basically rewrites the same poems over and over again. Rachel then reads a poem in the book titled Money. After reading this poem, she says that there's no poetic techniques, structure, or rhythm. She says there's nothing of any real substance and compares it to a Tumblr post or an Instagram caption. This honestly made me laugh because I'm like guilty of opening up my notes app whenever I have like a deep or woke thought and then think, maybe I'm a writer. I should start a book. Except instead of writing and releasing these mediocre Tumblr-esque thoughts like Gabbie did, I keep them in my notes app and never look at them again. Rachel also says that Gabbie's poems seem lazy and like she just writes a rough draft and never goes back to edit it. She then proceeds to give Gabbie advice by saying to develop her ideas further and edit more. She also says that Gabbie has no sense of rhythm when it comes to her poetry. I honestly learned a lot about poetry and how it's structured just from watching this video of Rachel.
So this poem's basic form is 5 repetitions of 2 lines and then 1 line. It's also important to note that the 2-line stanzas both start with the same phrase, which here is called anaphora.
She clearly knows what she's talking about and cares about it a lot. She ends the video by saying that Gabbie's poetry is hard to read and unenjoyable, and then even apologizes that she didn't enjoy the book and thanks Gabbie for sending it to her.
I'm sorry I didn't enjoy this book, but thank you to Gabbie for sending it me anyway.
Rachel says that she hopes Gabbie can take what she said as the constructive criticism that it's intended to be. Now, do we think Gabbie did that? Well, of course not. Shortly after she posted this video, Rachel commented underneath saying, "Update, all the respect I had for Gabbie growing and reaching out for sending me this book, gone completely." Straight after this video was published, she went crying to our one mutual friend about it in an attempt to guilt trip me and ask I not make any more. "I'm so over all this childish drama. You sent me a book, it got reviewed. That's how the world works." Edit, my mistake, I misunderstood. She went crying to him about me making the review before I published it, and he only told me after it was published. It was never explicitly said it was a guilt trip, but I see no other reason for either of them to say anything / reach out other than get me to change, stop, take down my review. But it still stands that she reaches out to me and sent me her book with the implication that I'd review it and then cried to our only mutual friend about being messed up over the fact that I was reviewing it. I only did what she asked for, and her going to Jimmy like that feels like an intentional way to stir the pot. A review is a review. I reviewed the book, not Gabbie. Telling me Gabbie is scared of your review or whatever is not going to change the content of the book and therefore not going to change how I reviewed it. I stand by my review 100%, but also feel incredibly manipulated and disgusted by this whole situation. It seems like Gabbie thought that by sending Rachel her book, all would be okay and Rachel would swoon over the fact that the Gabbie Hanna reached out to her, but no, Rachel reviewed the book in a video like she's done many times before with many other books and authors. No hard feelings involved. She strictly just talks about the poetry and also thanked Gabbie for sending it to her. It's like Gabbie expected Rachel to not review her book, but also like what author wouldn't want their book to be reviewed? Perhaps an author who knows their book is trash. Literally 6 months after Rachel posted her review on Dandelion, Gabbie tweeted about how she loved poetry and how she could break the rules when writing it. She then has a breakdown via Instagram stories.
She's not a f***ing artist. I don't care about her opinion because she has no accomplishments in art or has proven to me that she's actually intellectual enough to understand art.
And in these, she calls Rachel abusive, manipulative, and narcissistic, 3 of Gabbie's favorite adjectives, it seems.
Narcissistic, 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 narcissism, narcissistic, narcissistic.
She says Rachel started a hate campaign against her poetry, when in reality, all Rachel did was review the book. That's literally it. After posting several stories calling out Rachel responded directly to Gabbie. How do we know this? Well, because Gabbie posted a screenshot of the private response. Anyway, Rachel says, "Leave me out of your attention-seeking games and go get some help, please. Clearly, you're having some sort of breakdown again, and I understand. I've been there too, but this won't help. Please just go speak to your friends or family or calm down." And then blocked Gabbie. Gabbie then continues to post several videos on her Instagram story talking about Rachel. She says Rachel can't take criticism about herself and calls her a monster.
You're a f***ing monster. You're a bitch.
And then proceeds to say what Rachel is doing is narcissistic abuse. What happens next is honestly so gross and makes me so angry as a small creator. Gabbie then starts shitting on Rachel's views on her channel. Apparently, Rachel claimed Gabbie was talking about all of this 6 months later for attention, and Gabbie says that it's the opposite. She brings up how Rachel got millions of views off of her, but then only got 4,000 views on a makeup tutorial that she posted.
She says I'm talking about her for attention. You mean Miss 4K views on your makeup tutorial? I'm talking about you for attention. You talk about me, you get millions.
This is just disrespectful, and I can't imagine how this made Rachel feel. Even for Gabbie, this was like such a low blow. Gabbie then says that Rachel mocked her childhood trauma when she released her parody book. Remember the one that we talked about earlier, Dogolescence? Gabbie says that Rachel published a book mocking her and calls Rachel a weird ass bitch.
You weird ass bitch. You published a book mocking me.
Fast forward to today, well, a few days ago, nearly 3 months after Gabbie's Instagram story meltdown, Rachel Oates uploaded a video on her channel titled Parody, Cruel or Creative. As you can see, the video is over an hour long, and if you don't have the time to watch that or just simply don't want to, don't worry, that's what I'm here for. So let's get into the summary of the video. Rachel starts off her video by saying that she doesn't want this to turn into a he said she said situation and thinks that it could be a great learning opportunity. She wants to use her platform to educate people on what the word parody actually means and why it is arguably an art form in itself and not meant to be used in an offensive way. She then brings up the parody book that she wrote, Dogolescence. She says the book is in no way a mockery of Gabbie as a person or the topics that she discussed in her book Adultolescence. Rachel says that her book is purely a parody of Gabbie's writing style and a critique of her writing style.
It was in no way a mockery of Gabbie as a person or the subject matter of her book Adultolescence. It was purely a parody of her writing style and a critique of her writing style.
Rachel then addresses the comments that she's been seeing of people saying that her making a parody is petty or going too far. She says the people saying this are of course entitled to their own opinion, but she is going to defend herself. She said if Gabbie's claims of Rachel mocking her trauma were true, she would understand and agree with people calling her mean and going too far. But she goes on to say that this simply isn't the case. And if Gabbie actually read the book, she would see that there was nothing in Dogolescence mocking Gabbie's trauma that she wrote about in her book. She says she will always stand by her right and the right of others to release parodies of other people's work and art. She says a common misconception is that parodying something means to mock something or just outright make fun of it. Rachel says this is not true and goes on to explain why. Throughout this video, she uses examples of other author parodies and how the writing format of parodies dates way back in history. Rachel also briefly mentions how she believes there's a double standard when it comes to parodying. She says that when men parody something, it's encouraged and men are called smart and funny, but when women do so, they're seen as bitchy. This is interesting because Gabbie calls Rachel along with many other not so nice things, which she talks about how she wrote a book mocking her book and trauma. Yet Gabbie has claimed that comedian Bo Burnham is a huge inspiration to her.
Bo Burnham is a huge inspiration.
And guess what Bo Burnham has done and is known for? Parodying. Also, this isn't trashing Bo Burnham, he's freaking hilarious, I love him, but it's to show how Gabbie herself even seems to participate in this double standard when it comes to women and men being perceived in the creative world. Bo Burnham released a song called White Woman's Instagram. The music video is parodying the basic white girls' Instagrams, and towards the end of the music video, Bo is seen with words written on his face, pretty obviously taking inspiration from a TikTok that Hanna had made. Let's take a look at Gabbie's response to Bo parodying her. She tweeted side-by-side photos of her and Bo and said, "Also, I am 100,000% sure I wasn't anywhere close to Bo Burnham's mind while he was alone in a room for over a year creating a special entirely on his own. I do like to imagine." Gabbie's response to Bo parodying her was very positive, and she clearly was okay with it. Now let's have a quick refresher on Gabbie's response to Rachel Oates parodying her book when she released Dogolescence.
The fact that you made a book mocking me. You fucking weird ass bitch. You published a book mocking me.
Alice on Twitter replied to Gabbie's tweet saying, "So when a man parodies you, you praise him, but when a woman makes an intelligent, well-thought-out critique, you call her a bitch. Your misogyny is showing." It seems like Gabbie plays a huge part in this double standard, and it is very disappointing, especially considering the fact that Gabbie herself has spoken up about this double standard against women for so long, and she's mentioned it in interviews as well, so yeah, I don't understand where she's going with this. Rachel defines a parody as a piece of work which mimics or at least takes considerable inspiration from parts or pieces of work and often uses exaggeration in a humorous way in order to critique the original works. She states that in order to parody something, you need to be critiquing something from a literacy analysis perspective and not just make fun of someone or someone's work. Rachel says this is the huge distinction from her parodying Gabbie's writing, which is what she did, not mock Gabbie's trauma, which Gabbie claimed Rachel did. Rachel defends her parody book by saying saying the way that in which it was written, it was never about Gabbie as a person, and it was never about mocking the experience that Gabbie wrote about in her book, but instead it was written to parody Gabbie's writing style. Rachel also says that when she wrote this parody book, she was indifferent when it came to Gabbie as a person. She admits that she didn't like her writing, but never had any feelings towards Gabbie herself. And to further back up and defend herself, Rachel says that she actually has an entire Instagram page parodying other writers' poetry. This account is called Too Deep For You Poetry, and it's filled with parodies written by Rachel. This shows that when releasing her parody book, Dog Lessons, it was never a direct attack towards Gabbie Hanna. Rachel was not mocking Gabbie as a person or her experience. She was parodying Gabbie's awful writing style again. Rachel also points out that she had to do hours of research in order to properly write this book. She had to study the way Gabbie articulated her poems and really figure out how to properly parody adult lessons. Rachel also says that in the deleted videos, Gabbie numerous times has called Adult Lessons a parody of famous poet Shel Silverstein's work.
Obviously, Shel Silverstein is a huge inspiration.
Rachel assumed that since Gabbie was okay with parodying Silverstein, that she wouldn't take offense to Rachel parodying Adult Lessons, but that clearly wasn't the case.
You're a monster. You're a bitch.
And Rachel says this is a personal dig at Gabbie rather than her work for once. I guess we can add hypocrisy to her list of traits. Go off, Rachel. Honestly, throughout this entire nearly 2 years of back and forth between the two, Rachel has always remained classy and kept her arguments and comments strictly about Gabbie's writing, not Gabbie herself, so hearing her tiny version of clapping back at Gabbie had me cheering her on when watching her most recent video. She also says that she disagrees with Gabbie, calling her book a parody, further proving that Gabbie doesn't quite understand the actual meaning of parody. She says it could be argued that Gabbie's writing is heavily inspired by Silverstein, but that the book isn't a parody of it, since she's not deliberately critiquing or exaggerating anything from Shel Silverstein's work, which is what makes a parody. She says the humor in her book Dog Lessons is that it's written from her dog's perspective.
The humor in Dog Lessons comes from the fact that it's written from Kyra's perspective. It's a dog writing a love poem to a steak. Like, it's quite funny. Even I have a giggle at it, and I wrote it.
Humor is never directed towards Gabbie. Rachel then talks about her issues with people like Gabbie, who are so insulted by the parody book being from the perspective of a dog. She talks about how her dog Kyra was a rescue who has been through some hard times, and anyone who thinks a dog's experience in life is less important or less meaningful just because they're a dog is gross to think like that, and that's just not true. She says it's rude and unempathetic to claim that it's degrading to be compared to a wonderful little person who happens to be a dog. Rachel clearly takes this seriously, and I totally agree with every point that she made. Rachel also shares that she's made a document with side-by-side comparisons of Gabbie's poems next to the ones written by Rachel and her dog Kyra that are parodying Gabbie's. She says she wants everyone to be able to see for themselves that she not once mocks Gabbie or her trauma, and that it's evidence that all this book was a parody of Gabbie's writing style in her book Adult Lessons. I think that this speaks volumes because it's literally like that phrase, the proof is in the pudding. Rachel is basically saying, if you don't believe the points that I've made in this video so far, see for yourself. She gives people the full book in a document for free to analyze and read for themselves. That is how confident she is in her claims of this book strictly being a parody and not a mockery of Gabbie Hanna. And towards the end of the video, Rachel says that the one positive Gabbie can take away from all of this is that Gabbie's book will not be forgotten. She says that before she reviewed it, Gabbie's book was only read by her immediate audience, friends and family members. By Rachel reviewing Gabbie's book, it led to many other people from different sources hearing about the book, and while the majority of this attention towards the book may have been negative, it still brought attention to Gabbie as an author, and she could have used that as an opportunity to release a second, improved book, which she failed to do with Dandelion. Rachel says that if Gabbie has actually listened to the reviews and critiques that her and many others were speaking of, that Gabbie could have used it as a learning experience. In Rachel's words, she says, but instead she chose to act like a child and throw childish insults at one of the few people who actually saw potential in her work, and points at herself. But since Gabbie had such an immature and negative response towards Rachel when she posted those Instagram stories, Rachel says that's all Gabbie will be remembered for when it comes to her poetry. Yet again, we are faced with a situation where Gabbie turns something seemingly harmless into public drama, where she tries to make herself out to be the victim, which comes to no one's surprise at this point. Another point made in Rachel's video is that there were other parody books written after adultolescence, and there were many other critique videos that were much less educated and respectful that were made reviewing Gabby's book, but Gabbie ignored all of those people and chose to come for Rachel Oates specifically. Why? Well, let's hear that directly from Rachel herself.
Gabbie is very clearly intimidated by other women, especially ones that she and the world perceives as smarter than her.
Go off, Rachel! In her own classy way, Rachel basically just said that the reason Gabbie went after her is because she felt threatened by her intelligence, which I'm gonna have to agree with Rachel on that. So that's basically the short version of Rachel's most recent video. Of course, I want to hear your opinion in the comments down below. Do you think Gabbie's reaction was at all acceptable? Was Rachel being petty when writing her parody book, Dogolescence? Should she send Gabbie an autographed copy of it? I don't know. Comment down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed watching this. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. I post new videos every single day. I'll see you in the next video.